Hey everybody. So as I said, you are all really welcome along to our webinar today on edible trees. We're really delighted to be celebrating Tree Week with you all of this week. My name is Claire Patton with the Green Schools Biodiversity Themes, and I'm joined today by my colleagues Rob Nelson, Green Schools Officer, and Niamh Ní Dhul, Leaf Woodland Officer. And we're going to be chatting to you a little bit about the different things that you can eat on Irish trees. So just before we get into things, just gonna go through a few little bits and pieces. So as I said, this webinar is being recorded. That's going to be up on our YouTube channel later on in case any other classes in your school missed it. They can catch it later. The only screens that will be recorded are mine and the other facilitators, so you can leave your cameras on if you like. But we would ask you to please keep your microphones turned off. And we have a big group today, so we don't want any background noise. But we do want to hear from you. So I'm going to be asking you lots of questions. So maybe have somebody ready to answer using our chat box to tell us what you already know about trees. And if you have questions, you can also pop them into the chat box and we'll have a bit of time for a Q&A at the end. If you want to say hi to us in the chat box and let us know where you are joining us from, we'd love to hear from you. And also don't forget to check out the Tree Week event page on the Green Schools website. It's got tons of other pre-recorded videos, resources, and activities to help you get outside and learn about trees this week. And we also have a recording of our webinar that Niamh did on Monday. That's Os Gaeilge on Irish trees if you want to watch that back. So let's kick on and get to the main event today. So this today's webinar is all what we could eat on our trees. But before we get into that, I wanted to go through just how many amazing things trees provide us with. So what we'll be discussing today is mostly food, but they also are really important in terms of keeping our air nice and clean, taking in carbon dioxide and giving out oxygen. And they store tons of carbon, which is really important for preventing global warming. And there's lots and lots of other reasons. I've only put
Claire, if you can hear me, we can't hear you. You've frozen. So I might take over the presentation. So just give us a second. We'll sort that out. So we were talking about we're going to focus on edible trees, but we're talking about the different things that trees give us and the many benefits they provide. So we'll focus on the food today, but they also provide clean air. They breathe in the carbon dioxide, they keep the carbon, so they store the carbon out in the atmosphere, and then they breathe out the oxygen. So can you think of any other? You might pop it in the chat if you think of any other. Um, so I don't see
Thanks,
much
Rob.
going
I
into the
think
chat, but we have things that, well, Claire, if you want to keep on going, you can go while you're
yeah,
going.
that maybe would you mind, Rob, maybe just sharing the presentation? That might be easier for my
Yeah,
bandwidth.
it's up here now. So can
Yeah,
you see? Yeah.
perfect. So I can see there's loads of great answers coming in there to the chat. That trees provide wood for furniture, paper, habitats for animals and insects. Those are all really great responses, guys. So let's go on to the next slide and see what other ones are there. I love that one. Happiness and fun walking through beauty. That is a great answer. So you guys have covered loads of the reasons there. Trees are really important for helping keeping our planet cool. They're a really important part of the water and air cycles. They store and recycle nutrients. They defend us from flooding. I bet lots of you might notice that if you play football or GAA or anything with a pitch, that those pitches can get really waterlogged. But if you're out walking through a forest, they tend to be a bit drier. So trees are really important from that point of view, and also providing shelter from wind and rain. You guys mentioned home for habitats. There's loads of animals and plants which rely on trees. And they also connect different areas to each other. So we call them like a wildlife corridor. So they're a way for animals to get from one place to the next, which is really important. But we're going to focus on food today, and the different parts of the tree that might provide food for us. So can anyone think of the parts of a tree that might be most important for us in terms of being able to eat? There's lots of different parts to the tree. There's the roots, the trunk, the branches, the leaves, the flowers, the fruits, the nuts. What do you think might be something that you might go out and have a nibble on? So we have a few different answers coming in. So we've got fruit, leaves, roots, fruits, leaves. So let's go on to the next slide and have a look. Bark. So these are maybe the main parts that can be used as food sources. We've got fruits, flowers, nuts, and leaves or needles when we're talking about what people eat. And we'll go into all of these in a bit more detail now, and we'll see which ones are the most helpful for us. So let's start off with fruit. So fruit was probably the most popular answer from you guys. So let's first think, why are trees producing fruits? Is it just to give us a nice tasty snack, or is there some benefit to the tree? So it's not just something that trees do to be helpful. It's actually a really important way of making sure that they survive and that that they have more trees like them. So when you think of what's inside a tree, it's generally seeds. And seeds are the key reason why trees are making fruit. So every time a new tree grows, it starts off as a seed. So seeds are basically young trees. Tree always grows from a seed. And if you have a look at those trees in the picture there, growing quite closely together, if you imagine that the one tree is producing seeds and they just fall on the ground below it, those seeds are not going to have room to grow into new trees. So the first job of any seed is to get away from the plant that they grew on, whether it's a tree or a flower or a grass. They need to move, they need to find their own space. And there's lots of different ways that they do that. And one technique is by growing a fruit around it. And the fruit is a way of basically getting animals to come and help them. Now, this is a little bit gross, this part, guys, so hold on to your hats. So a fruit is lovely and tasty. It's usually colorful or bright, a contrast to the rest of the colors of the tree. It might have a nice smell. So an animal might come along, eat the fruit with the seed inside of it, thinks it's delicious, it's happy, it's had a lovely snack, and then that animal goes off and the seed works its way through the animal's body and comes out the other end in its poo. Now, animal poo is very helpful for seeds. It gives them a nice little boost to help them to grow into new trees. And everything works out for the tree and for the animal. The animal gets food, and the tree gets to move its seeds to a new place to grow. So this is why trees produce them. And if you think about, any of the fruits that you eat, oranges, apples, bananas, blackberries, they all are tasty. They usually have a nice smell. They're often, well, the ones we eat are often full of sugar to appeal to us. But actually, if you ever were to go somewhere and pick fruit that's growing wild from a tree, you might notice it tastes a bit different to the ones you buy in the shops. Wild animals usually don't need as much sugar as we do. It doesn't, they don't have that same sugar addiction that we do. So there's not as much sugar in wild fruits as there are in the ones that we buy in the shops. But they still taste good to us. So that's why trees produce them. So we're going to move on to a few fruits which grow in the wild in Ireland. So I'm sure you all know the apple. I'm sure lots of you have apples with you for your lunch. This crab apple is the only kind of native apple tree to Ireland. I wonder if any of you ever tasted crab apples. They are not as nice as an apple that you might buy in the shops. They're much smaller, they're a bit more sour. And this is going to be a common theme to a lot of the fruits that grow in Ireland, is that they are not as sweet as many other fruits that even grow around the world. The reason for that usually is that we don't have as much heat available. A lot of fruits need heats to really, or heat to develop their sugars. So a lot of the naturally growing fruits in Ireland are a little bit more sour than others. But crabapple is one which grows a lot, and I bet you know, some of you might have other types of apple trees growing in your schools or at home. And in Ireland, we're really lucky that there's lots of different types of apples available. So they might not have been growing here 10,000 years ago, but they've been growing here for a long time. So we have what are called different kinds of heritage apples that have different flavors and different colors, and they can kind of mix and match. And the crab apple tree is really important for helping to produce new strains of apples. So it's a great little tree, even though you might not go and eat lots of them. But they are sometimes used for making jams and jellies and things like that. So let's see if anyone can work out what this next fruit is. This is a bit of a harder one. Has anybody seen this fella before? So this is a fruit or a berry which grows on a tree that you might find in hedgerows in Ireland. It is, again, not very tasty. It's not a blueberry. It's not as nice. Oh, I think we got a right answer there. Not a bilberry. Yeah, a few of you are getting it right. This is a slowberry. SLOE, sloes. So sloe berries, does anyone know what tree they grow on before we go on to the next slide, which will tell us? It's not called the sloe tree, it has a different name. Again, yeah, it grows in hedgerows. That might be a bit of a hard one. Let's jump on to the next slide and find out what tree it grows on. Oh, Miss Marta's class got it just in time. Blackthorn tree, very good. So the blackthorn tree it has thorns on it, spiky, it's where it's getting its name from, and it produces these berries. They do look a lot like blueberries, you're right, but they do not taste like blueberries. They are very, very sour and kind of bitter. If you put one in your mouth, it's almost tastes salty, and your mouth kind of sucks in almost like you've had a big lemon or something. But some people do collect them and use them to make things. Some of your parents or teachers might have put them in a gin, that can be quite nice. But yeah, it's not something I would say you should go out and start eating a ton of. They're not very tasty. So let's see what we've got next. What about this fruit? Does anybody know what this one is? Again, this is these are fruits that grow on a tree in Ireland. A lot of you might have them again around your school. We're getting lots of right answers coming in here, and it is again a tricky one. It's not blackcurrants, it's not cranberries, it is elderberries. Very good, guys. So elderberries, they're these small dark purple berries. They grow on the elder tree. And again, I would say you should not eat a lot of these. And that's not just because they are kind of sour, but actually if you eat too many elderberries, they can make you slightly sick. But if you cook them, they become lovely. So when you cook them, it removes the kind of the toxic part of them. And people a lot of times will make them into a jam. But you know, if you eat one or two, they're not too harmful. But if you eat a lot, it can make you feel sick. So again, I would never really go and eat anything I find growing outside unless I know what it is and what it's going to do to me. So you should always be careful when you're picking things in the wild if you're not sure about them. So that's elder, and I bet loads of you have elder in your school grounds. So you might not notice them very often, but they are an interesting food source. The berries are usually in really big clumps, so sometimes you can take one or parts of one at a time. And that's the other thing if you're going out foraging, is to be aware not to take all of the berries or the nuts or anything from one tree, because you always want to leave some for wild animals, and for that tree to have a chance to spread its seeds. So let's see what we've got on our next slide. Okay, what about this fruit here? I bet some of you also have this growing around your school. Oh, very good. Wrong 5, straight in with the right answer. This is cherry, very good cherries. So again, very different to what you find in the shops. And in Ireland, we've got 2 different kinds of native cherry tree. We've got wild cherry and bird cherry. They both produce berries or cherries. Bird cherry is kind of a darker, more of a black berry. And again, these do not taste like the cherries you buy in the shops. They are not as sweet at all, but you can eat them. Um, they just, yeah, you might not enjoy them as much as the shop bought ones. Like I said, we don't have quite as much sun here to get all the sweetness from them. And cherry can be a bit of a confusing tree because again, you might be familiar with the ornamental cherry blossom trees. They're Japanese, mostly Japanese. They have lovely flowers. They're different from our wild cherry and our bird cherry. But the wild cherry and the bird cherry also do produce lovely blossoms, but they're not the big large ones that you come from Japan. But yeah, they're a great tree to have growing around you, and they're a nice thing to try a few times, even if you don't love it. So let's move on. So those are just a few examples of the fruits which grow on native trees in Ireland. But fruits aren't the only way that trees move their seeds. So I said a few minutes ago that the reason that trees produce fruits is because they want to help their seeds spread. It's not the only way. Another thing that they can do is produce a nut or something inside a hard shell. And these can also be edible. There's not as many in Ireland that are edible for people as there are maybe for animals, but we do have a few. And the way that animals move these seeds is a little bit different to fruits. So if an animal were to eat, let's say, for example, an acorn, if they eat the acorn and then go off and do a poo, there's not going to be a seed that comes out the other end that can grow into a tree. So they are actually moved by animals kind of more by accident. A lot of animals like squirrels and some birds like jays will move like an acorn from one spot to the next, and they might bury it and think, I'll come back and find that now when it's winter time and I don't have any food left, and I'll dig it up and eat it. But what can happen is they don't find it again, they forget, and it can grow. So you guys have already been putting in some examples there about the different kind of seeds that are inside hard nuts and hard shells, which might be edible. So let's see what examples we have. So do you guys know what is in this picture here? This is an edible nut which grows on a native Irish tree. I think I might have seen somebody mention it already. Yeah, we've got loads of right answers. Well done. This is the hazelnut. So hazelnuts were really important in Ireland for a long time. They're probably one of the only kind of fruits or nuts we're going to mention in this presentation that was really important food source for people. You can get loads of energy from hazelnuts. They're really delicious. And they can be hard to find. You might notice in that picture, they're almost camouflaged because they have that green kind of shell in them. So when they're ready, when they're ripe, they'll fall off. And we'll come back to colors a bit later. So I said is a tricky one, but loads of you guys are getting it right. So is it just a chestnut? What kind of chestnut? So this is a horse. Is it a horse chestnut? So these are a little bit flatter than a horse chestnut, and they're a slightly different shape, the cover that they're in. Yeah, there we are. This is sweet chestnut. Very good. So sweet chestnuts, um, they are actually not a native tree to Ireland. I'm kind of cheating a bit by including these. They were introduced, yeah, borderline, Rob, you're right. They've been here a really long time, but they are not the same as horse chestnuts or conkers. They're flatter and they are tastier. Um, they you might find them a lot of times at Christmas time. You know, the song Chestnuts Roasting on an Open Fire. And they're really tasty, yeah, when you roast them and maybe add a little bit of salt. They're pretty delicious. So yeah, sweet chestnuts, they're one of my favorites. Okay, so those are just a couple of examples of edible nuts. Like I said, there's not as many as we have got fruits. Um, there are a few more maybe that you could eat, but which aren't going to give you much enjoyment. So it's better not to. So what about flowers? So yeah, you guys are brilliant at this. So this is an elderflower. And flowers, bit different now from the idea of seeds and fruits. Flowers are not designed to be really eaten by people. They aren't to spread seeds. They've got a different purpose. So flowers are generally there to attract pollinators to come along, take pollen from them, and move them to another flower so that the plant can produce seeds and fruits and nuts and so on. But the flowers are kind of there to be attractive to pollinating insects or birds in other countries. Um, so they are kind of more focused on, yeah, attracting those flying insects. And how they do that usually is they have got this sweet nectar inside of them. And that can give off a nice smell, which is what something we all might enjoy about flowers. Again, they might be colorful to attract those flying insects. But they might not necessarily be tasty. There are some flowers that you can actually go and suck the nectar from. Some of you might have done that, and it is sweet. Um, but there's not a huge amount of flowers that people would generally eat. Elderflowers are one of them. You might make elderflower cordial with them, really nice. And it is quite sweet. And there are some other examples as well. Some people do eat flowers from hawthorn trees, and there's a few others, but they might not be quite as possible. Gorse flowers as well. Yeah, again, they're usually the ones you might notice the strong smell from. It's telling you that there's something nice in them. And then leaves and needles then. What about those ones? So again, we think about what is their main job, their main role in a tree. It's not really attracting insects. That's not really what they're looking to do. So yeah, hawthorn, you're right. Hawthorn is the tree on the left there that has the leaves. And they are edible, especially young hawthorn. Dandelions are another edible one. You're right. They're not a tree, but they're an edible leaf. So there are more likely to be there's probably more examples of edible plants, leaves that grow on the ground, and pine on your right there, you're right. So the Scots pine there, some people will make like a tea from this. It has lots of good vitamins in it. Nettles is another example. Yeah, you can eat the leaves from those. But if you think about what leaves do is they're the kind of the factory in the plant for producing the plant's food. So plants need to have lots of leaves there. They don't really want them all to be eaten, because if an animal comes and eats all of the leaves on a hawthorn tree, that tree isn't going to survive very long. They need their leaves to soak in the sun, and produce food, which powers the rest of the tree. So trees aren't making them brightly colored. They're not making them tasty. They're not filling them up with nice sugars, as you know, in general. They're more using them to like I said, soak up the sun and make food. So there are some examples that we've kind of mentioned there that you can eat them, but you're not going to find trees that really want that to happen. And in fact, lots of trees try and protect their leaves. So even the hawthorn, it has lots of thorns on the branches to try and reduce animals coming in and eating them. Some trees have chemicals that they release if something starts to chew on their leaves that doesn't taste very nice or that is poisonous. So trees will actually try and defend their leaves from being eaten as opposed to their fruits and their nuts, which they don't mind being eaten once they're ripe. Okay, so those are just the four main types of parts of the tree that people might look to eat. So now we're going to have a quick look at other plants that might grow around trees and forests. So we said at the beginning, one of the important things that trees do is they provide habitats. And those habitats aren't just homes for animals, they also allow other plants to grow in and around them and under them. And some of those plants are edible. So can you guys think of any plants which might grow in a forest which you can eat? Oh, so straight away we've got mushrooms coming in from lots of people. Yeah, that is a great example. Wild garlic, very good. Blackberries, very good. So there's loads of examples coming in here. Nettles, yeah, very good. Berries, herb Robert. Brilliant, guys. So I just picked out a few to show you. So let's see what I went for first. So yeah, mushrooms. Now mushrooms, I've got to say, they're not my favorite for a couple of reasons. One, I don't really like the taste, that's just me, but also they are not always edible. So a lot of mushrooms in Ireland can actually make you sick. And I would always say to be very, very careful if you're foraging for mushrooms because there are some mushrooms that you can eat that look almost the exact same as another mushroom that you cannot eat. So you really need to be an expert to be going out and picking mushrooms off the forest floor and giving them a nibble. Because like I said, there are some that are totally safe and that some people find tasty, not me, but some people like, and then there's others that can be actually very dangerous. So you need to be quite confident when you're foraging for mushrooms. But yeah, they really grow well in forests. So mushrooms like growing. Some mushrooms will grow up along the trunks of trees. You'll see them coming out of the trees. Some mushrooms will grow on dead logs on the ground. So when a tree loses a branch or falls over, you might see mushrooms start to grow around that. Some will grow from the forest floor. Some also grow underground. So we've got mushrooms that connect trees to each other by their roots. And this is actually a really, really important role that they play because the roots from one tree might not join directly, they might not touch the roots from another, but you might get a load of mushrooms that are growing between those roots. And they actually really help the trees by passing food between them and sometimes even information. So I mentioned that trees might try and defend themselves if they're being eaten by, let's say, a swarm of insects. What some trees are able to do is they can release like a warning signal. Sometimes that goes through the air to the tree next to it saying, careful, there's insects coming, get your defenses ready, and get your toxins ready to try and stop that happening. And they pass a lot of messages under the ground as well, but a lot of the times those are food. So mushrooms are really helpful for trees and forests in creating that kind of communication system. So let's see, what was the next one I mentioned was wild garlic. Lots of you mentioned that. This is a lovely plant to eat. And unlike mushrooms, it's very easy to identify because it is very, very smelly. So if you walk into somewhere where there's wild garlic growing, you will know all about it. There will be a really strong smell of garlic. If you don't really smell it, it might not be wild garlic and you shouldn't eat it because there are some plants that look quite like wild garlic. And there's a plant called Lords and Ladies, and the leaves look very similar to wild garlic. But it is actually poisonous. So again, use your nose for identifying wild garlic, and you can make lots of nice stuff with that. The leaves and the flowers are edible, but the leaves are the nicest part, I think. And now we've got another plant which grows in the woodland called wood sorrel. This is actually, if you find wood sorrel growing in a forest, it's probably a good sign that this is a really old, ancient woodland. So wood sorrel tends to be a sign that forest has been there for a long time. This one here, I'll give you another warning on this, is something that you should not eat a lot of. So people do eat little bits of wood sorrel. They might put it in a soup or a salad, but it has a type of acid in it that if you eat too much, again, it will make you sick. So you do need to be a little bit careful with wood sorrel. And you're better out. You can eat loads of wild garlic and you'll be okay. Maybe you might have some garlicky breath, but otherwise you'll be okay. But wood sorrel, you don't want to eat a huge amount of. But they are a lovely plant as well. And like I said, it's a good sign if you find that, you know that woodland's been there for a long time. Okay, I've got one more woodland plant. I think you will all know this one very well. This is blackberries, so they grow on brambles, and they a lot of the time will grow along the edges of forests because they do need a good bit of sunlight. So you won't find them in the middle or along a hedgerow, or if you've got a hedgerow growing around your school or any kind of plants, bramble often grows on top of it, over it. They're kind of climbers. And in the sunlight, you will find the tastiest ones. So I mentioned about colors earlier, and blackberries is a good example. So when you go to a blackberry bush or brambles, kind of early in summer, and when the blackberries are just beginning to grow, they're generally green. I remember I mentioned that the trees produce fruits and they make them brightly colored in order to make them stand out, so animals come and find them. So why are they green then at the beginning? So when they're green, that usually means that they are not ripe, they're not ready yet. So they're kind of trying to hide them while they're still green because the seeds inside them are not ready to grow. So if an animal comes along and eats them while they're green, those seeds that are inside them aren't going to grow into new blackberries. And as they do start to change color, they go red and then black. They're also getting sweeter and tastier. So your reward for waiting until they're ready is that it is a nicer, sweeter berry. And this is true of a lot of fruits that grow, is that if they're not ripe, they start off green or a different color. So something happens that change their color to show that they are ready. And if you are interested in starting to go and forage for your own food, blackberries is a nice simple one to begin with because you know it's a blackberry. It's not easy to get mixed up with something else. They're tasty. Even if you eat a lot of them, you'll be okay. There's nothing to worry about with blackberries. It can be good to try and give them a wash before you eat them, especially if they're growing down low to the ground. You might find animals have come along and weed on them or just even brush past them. You might have bugs on them as well. So if you are out for a walk and you can't wait to get home to wash them, pick ones that are at least as high as your shoulder and in your hand, shake them like a dice. And if there's any bugs on them, that will shake them off. So that's a little trick, but yeah, it's best to wash them if you can. So those are just a few examples of plants that grow in and around trees that are also edible. And just to finish up, we'll just talk a bit about the food that trees produce that other animals besides us eat. So we obviously aren't the only animals that take food from trees. Anybody think of other animals that rely on trees for their food? So if you can think of any other animals that might rely on trees for their food, pop it in the chat there. And we'll have a think about, do you think they eat the same parts that we do? Are they eating the same fruits and nuts, or are they eating other things? So loads of great answers coming in there. Squirrels, birds, foxes, hedgehogs, rabbits, definitely. These are all great answers. Leaves and berries. Bees, yeah, good one. I wonder would anyone think of that. Branches. Giraffe, yeah, definitely in other countries, giraffes, they rely on them. Slugs, yeah, good one. Butterflies, yeah, loads of great answers coming in. So let's see what we went with. So we definitely already talked about that fruit is a part of the tree that animals rely on, or the trees rely on. They want those birds and foxes and lots of other animals to come and eat their berries and disperse them. And the lots of animals will eat the berries that we don't eat. So there are a lot of trees that produce fruits that either we don't like to eat, they're not tasty, or that might actually make us sick, but other animals can eat them. So there's lots of trees with red berries that, so people might have said, oh, if it's a red berry, it can sometimes be a sign it's not good for you. That's not always true, but it's good advice if you're not sure. But birds will still eat them and other animals as well. And it's the same with nuts. Lots of you mentioned squirrels. Um, the lots of the hard nuts we don't eat, like things like pine cones that have seeds in them. Not a lot of people are going to be eating things like acorns, horse chestnuts. But lots of squirrels and birds and mice and other small rodents will eat lots of those, and they're really important food sources for them. And then a few of you mentioned this next one. It was great. So flowers, okay, so the nectar and flowers are a really important food source for bees and not webinars, butterflies. So not all trees produce flowers that are good for these pollinators, but a few do, and they can be really helpful for them because they might be out at different types or different times of the year, to the flowers that are growing in the wildflower areas or on bushes and things like that. So flowers on trees can be a really important food source. Things like willow is really helpful for bees because it comes out so early, and all kinds of other flying insects. And then a few of you also mentioned insects and caterpillars. So the leaves of trees and the stems can be a really great food source for insects, but it's not something that the trees are usually very happy about. But there are some insects that lay their eggs on leaves, and when the young insects hatch, they can almost devour them. So aphids, yeah, you're right. Those are aphids, and aphids, yeah, they can really get through a lot of a leaf, so it can cause damage. And then lastly, if you mentioned bark and branches, so it might not seem as appealing to us, although there are some tree barks that we can eat or use to make things with. Animals like deer and rabbits, they might strip off some bark from trees, and particularly young trees. Deer are able to get through very quickly. So guys, that was just a really quick rush through lots of the different types of foods that we can find growing on trees for us or for animals here in Ireland. If you do have any questions, we'll stop sharing screen in a sec, and you can ask, and myself and Rob and Neve will do our best to answer. But do try your best to get outside this week for Tree Week and find out what kind of trees do you have growing around you, and do you think they produce any edible foods either for us or for other animals. So thanks for listening, guys, and we will take any questions if you have them. Thanks, everyone.
There's a question there, Claire, asking what fruit would deer eat?
Well, deer are more going to eat grass and plants that are growing in it. They're not really fruit eaters. Might be a bit too sweet for them. You think of where you see deer, they're often up in the mountains or in grasslands. So they would, yeah, like I said, they do eat young trees. It's usually that fibery, barky stuff. They graze on the grass. So yeah, they're not big fruit eaters.
I'd imagine they might nibble some, the smeradova, the black currants,
Oh
black
yeah.
edges. And I might just pop in there just also to think when you're out picking any wild food, because some of this might be in your school grounds or at home, but when you're picking from the wild, they ask you not to pick more than 10%
Yeah.
because it's always about leaving a lot for other people to collect possibly, but also for the wildlife. And the other thing to maybe really remember is to not damage the plants. Sometimes if you're picking a plant that you don't pick it from the root, you just pick the bits that you need and leave the rest, because we always want to make sure that they can produce more seeds and feed all the wild animals. So we just try and always remember that as well.
And one other thing there is not to go picking after really heavy rain, because that's when the rain stops and you go out picking, that's when all the insect activity is at its highest. So those things that are sheltering from the rain will be active, so you might be eating more than just your berries.
There
You
is
get some
a
extra
Most
protein.
poisonous berry, that's an interesting question. So the yew tree, the berry of the yew tree is poisonous to animals and to humans. Humans can actually tolerate a certain amount of it, but that's one of the reasons why yew trees were planted around graveyards, because the animals will actually steer clear of it, so they won't go digging around when there's yew trees there. So I think that's the most poisonous in Ireland, as far as I know,
I think
Neve.
so, yeah.
I'm open to correction there.
I think most of the others would be you would only eat a small amount of them and they might give you a tummy ache. But and you'd know yourself like sour apples or the elderberries. If you ate too much, your tummy would be a bit sore. But you would be the one that is the one you wouldn't go near. There's another one or two good questions. One is, what's your favorite foraged food? Claire, do you have a
I'd say maybe hazelnut
Yeah.
for me. They're really tasty. I've tried to make some homemade Nutella from them as well, which is a really nice thing to do. Bit more healthy than Nutella, though I did add a lot of sugar to it. So that's probably my favorite.
And
Nice.
maybe the other thing with foraging or collecting from the wild is there's different seasons. So you might collect nuts and berries in the autumn, and then in the spring it's sorrels. And so sometimes our body wants certain vitamins and minerals at a certain time of the year, like nettle soup or things like that. So at different times of the year. But I'd probably be the same. I love hazelnuts.
I'm a mushroom fan, unlike
Oh,
Claire. So mushrooms are always my top of my list, but at the moment it's starting the wild garlic season.
yeah,
And
that's a good
there's some
one.
lovely, if you get a really sunny day and you pinch some gorse under your fingers, you get a lovely coconut smell. So that's a lovely one to forage for. And then there's another plant called a pineapple weed. It's the same family as chamomile, and you can make a lovely tea out of it. Helps you with your sleep. And if you pinch the flower of that, you get coconut, or not coconut, pineapple-y smell, and that's one of my favorite plants, I think, at the moment. But
Nice.
yeah, great question.
Here's a good one, Rob. We were just talking about this before we started, guys. Is can fruits be used for medicine? And we were saying we might have to do a whole webinar about this, but I don't know, Rob or Neve, do you want to?
Yeah, well, a lot of our medicines would have been traditionally from trees. For example, we were talking about the elderberry, and elderberry is an antihistamine. So, if you had an allergic reaction, it's one of the things that you can use along with a plant called plantain, and your dock leaves. Then things like willow bark were used as aspirin. Birch is an anti-inflammatory. Um, and the keys of the ash tree are also an anti-inflammatory. So there's a huge number of our trees have been used as traditional medicines, and probably elements of them are used in the medicines we use today without us knowing, because we don't read all the fine print. So yeah, there's a huge amount there. It is a whole different webinar though.
Yeah, yeah. We'll do that for you another time, guys. Well, but it is a good question about how severe is the damage being done by deer in Killarney National Park. What do you guys think? It's pretty
Um,
serious. Go ahead, Neve.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tricky one because and it's not just Killarney, I suppose, Wicklow, Glenveigh, where there's a lot of the deer populations have gotten really big, and they're not necessarily the native red deer populations are still a bit small. It's probably the one in the deer that we introduced, the Sitka and there's the other one, there's the Sitka and the other one, or the Sika.
Fallow.
Yeah, the fallow deer. So it is an issue in well-established trees or kind of balanced woodlands. It isn't an issue. It's when there's a lot of young trees, and in some of the national parks, they're removing rhododendron to try and let the native trees come back, regenerate. And so what they're doing in terms of management, I know they fence off some areas to stop the deers getting in. But there's pros and cons because that's quite expensive. So it can be extreme in some places, and then in other places it's not as bad. So there's pockets of it, and I suppose they control it because the deer has no natural predator, because we don't have any wolves who would be their natural predator. They do culling. So that is the way they're managing them at the moment. So it's tricky because fencing, it doesn't always work. It works in some places, but you can't fence them out of everywhere. So there's a balance, and there's a lot of people doing a lot of meetings and talking and planning around it, because they all have different opinions on how to look to maybe prevent the damage. But it is an issue, yeah.
There's an interesting question there about how dangerous Japanese knotweed is. And the reason I'm going to tackle this question is actually Japanese knotweed in Japan is used to make tea. So it's another edible plant that could have been on our list. And it is an invasive species here. So what happens is the roots take ground underneath. So even when you cut it back, it kind of, if you cut the head off, two more come. So it spreads and smothers out the native population in our hedgerows, and that's the danger in it. The other danger in it is because of the nature of it. If you don't, how you tackle getting rid of it, you have to inject those roots, and those toxins can leave a mark on the land afterwards. And a lot of our invasives, like our rhododendron and our laurel, have to be dealt with in that same way. So all of those nice things that we might forage in the land that has been treated, like our mushrooms, pick up the toxins that we use to kill those plants, to get rid of them. So it's a double-edged sword. It smothers out what we'd like to grow there, and then when we do treat it and try and get rid of it, it actually puts toxins into the soil that last there for longer than we'd like. So yeah, another one of those balancing acts as how we can deal with it. So it is quite dangerous, and if we shouldn't really be allowed to bring plants like that into the country. But unfortunately we don't look at those things.
There's
We've got
another
a couple of questions about ash dieback coming in, about how serious is ash dieback. Are ash trees eventually all going to die out?
Yeah. I can go with this as well if you want.
Yeah, go on.
So ash dieback isn't as serious as they first thought. The first thought was that it would wipe out nearly 90% of the population. The current estimate, I think, is about 60 to 50%. The trees that are doing best are the trees that are in isolation from a family group. So if there was a grove of ash, you're likely to lose the whole grove of ash, whereas if it's an ash tree individually on its own, they seem to be doing stronger. So there's a lot of studies, genetic studies on those trees that are actually surviving it, and seeds from those trees are being stored in cold storage. And once the kind of disease plays its natural role and dies down, then we'll start to reintroduce it. So it's unfortunate at the moment it's causing a big problem, but I don't think it will have the same effect as something like Dutch elm disease, which nearly wiped out our population of elm. That it seems to be a bit more positive from anything I've read on it. I don't know if you agree, Neve, or is that what
Well,
you've
no,
read?
No, everything you're saying is true, but I suppose the other issue is where the ash is really dying back is when I suppose farmers or foresters were encouraged to grow plantations of them. And when you plant like a monoculture, like one species, even if they're all native, um, if a disease gets in, that's one of the reasons we encourage diversity in any kind of planting that you're doing. Even so, plantations would be where they plant them and they know they're going to cut them for use later, as opposed to a woodland that you plant to let grow for biodiversity and for people to visit. So one of the problems is monoculture. So we're trying to move away from that idea where you just plant one tree, because if a disease like the potato all those years ago with the famine, once a disease comes in, it hits the plant and the resilience is lower. So, but Rob's point is right. We're noticing that some ash trees seem to be more resilient to it, and they're the ones that we're hoping will survive, and that their seeds will have that resilience or resistance in them for the future. Because the ash is such an iconic and important tree in Ireland as well, so we wouldn't want to lose it. The reason it came in, just to give you, is that this is one of the discussions we have a lot about, is when we import trees, we often import a problem with it, like a pest or a disease that in their own country where they came from, like the Japanese knotweed, they're not a problem in Japan. But when you bring them into another ecosystem or another country, they can often become invasive. Because our hawthorn tree on Scagh Giall, which is such an important tree for us in Ireland, it was brought into North America and it's considered invasive there. So some plants, when they're introduced to ecosystems that there's no maybe balance, they get out of balance then as well. And just I might jump to another question where someone asked what type of native tree is most endangered in Ireland. And in a way, it mightn't be the individual trees that are endangered, it's more the woodland habitat. So we would have lots of old pockets of old woodland, and they're often down little valleys and streams and rivers, where you get really old oaks and hollies and rowan and mixed native woodlands. They're really important habitats. So it's probably the ecosystems and the habitats are more under threat maybe than the individual. Some trees are rarer than others, like the spindle tree, the Gelder rose. There's some that are rarer, but in general, I think it would be more the habitats are under pressure more than anything. And Claire mentioned wildlife corridors earlier. That's why hedgerows are so important, and how we look after our hedgerows is so important, because they hold a lot of the old trees in them and they connect the woodlands and the habitats together.
Here's a great question. I can see Rob reacting already. Would you be in favor or against the reintroduction of wolves? I was wondering, were you going to mention that, Niamh, when the question was asked about Killarney? I was actually at a big biodiversity conference recently, and somebody was putting forward the case for reintroducing wolves to Ireland. So it's a very complicated issue. There will be a lot of people very worried about it and against it. And I think that one of the biggest problems is the lack of space we have. Niamh was just talking about, there's only, we don't have huge amounts of wild space, even there's small patches of trees. So the idea of being able to support wolves, I think, is a difficult one, although you can see the really positive effect they've had on other habitats. In terms of controlling deers, there's a great video on the reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone, and the impact that has had. I'll try and find that while you guys weigh in on that if you like.
Well, I'll just say, like, Yellowstone is genuine wilderness.
Yeah.
So if you could hike for 4 hours into the mountains, and you would be 6 to 8 hours away from any hospital, any road, and we don't have that space in Ireland. There are roads to the top of our mountains. We don't have the tree cover for reintroducing wolves. And it's possible to argue that we never really had wolves in Ireland to start with. I don't know. I think a lot of things would have to change before we went managing the deer in that manner, and reintroducing things like a wild Atlantic rainforest, and and actual genuine areas of wilderness where we don't have human access to it, or that human access is limited to people hiking in and hiking out. I think that would need to happen before we really genuinely consider reintroducing wolves. I'm sure Neve probably has a similar opinion, but
Well, wolves and Oscoilga, one of their names is Mac Tira, like the son of the land. And I suppose when we were covered in oak forests, wolves had places to live and be. And I suppose one of the things I was thinking of was because all these plants and trees, they live in communities just like us. And I suppose over the years, as we've cut the trees and the wolves that were killed off, wolves are very shy animals. They don't actually want to interact with humans. And so in the wild, like for them to be safe and in the wild, we do, at the moment, the way we farm and manage the land, we wouldn't have places for the wolves to live safely without interacting with humans where there might be issues. So there's no point in bringing animals into a system when we're not ready for them. So, and it's gone out of my head and I can't remember, because sometimes people say this also just to create the discussion, just to make it how urgent it is for us to restore nature and to restore the habitats. And sometimes you get into the headlines when you say something, you know, it's quite sensational to say we need wolves back, but they are incredible creatures and they are really important in the whole kind of wild and woodland habitats, but we're not ready for them now. But I do remember someone talking about another animal that was maybe more appropriate to reintroduce, and I cannot think of the, the name of the animal. And it was an animal that was here before that maybe would be able to help with that. So I'd have to go and look it up and come back to you about that. But there's no
here's
answer again for that.
Well, guys, maybe we'll finish on a very complicated answer for you guys, because I know we've gone over time. But thanks very much to everybody for coming along and for all of your brilliant questions. And it was great to see how much you guys already knew. There were so many right answers coming in as we went along. So hopefully you enjoyed that, and hopefully you get a chance to get outside and check out the trees you have growing around you at some stage this week. And check out the webpage on Green Schools for Tree Week, and you'll find some activities there that you might enjoy. So thanks again for coming, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the week. Bye.
thanks, guys.
Margaret.